Hello everyone, we're now going to go to our first speaker with Deborah Leveroy from Dyslexia Box. I'm really looking forward to it. Are you okay, Deborah?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
It's amazing to have you here. I know where are you in the country?
I'm in South Cambridgeshire.
You're in South Cambridge, so that's brilliant. So I'm really looking forward to listening to your talk today. So I'm going to now hand over to Deborah to go for her presentation, and we're going to go from there. So looking forward to listening to it. So
Thanks,
over
Aaron.
to you, Deborah.
Thanks very much. So, lovely. My slides have appeared on the screen. Thank you very much, Mason. Hi, everybody. My name's Dr. Deborah Leveroy. I'm from Dyslexia Box. Mason, if you could click for me, there's a few things on there. Mason is our kind of backstage guru who's going to be doing my clicking on the presentation. So hopefully there's going to be a click coming now. Mason, can you do that? Brilliant. Okay, there you go. So there's my title. My employee is dyslexic. What do I do? Thank you very much. Mason, again, if you click for me. This talk, we're going to look at several different things. The first thing is we're going to focus this talk specifically on dyslexia. Obviously, there's many other specific learning differences, neurodiversities that we could talk about, but we've only got obviously a limited amount of time and I want to be as specific as possible for you. So we're going to focus in on dyslexia. We're going to talk about disclosure, what happens when an employee comes to you and tells you they're dyslexic. And we're going to look at workplace adjustments, what they are, and give you some examples, as well as access to work, the process for that. So the next slide has appeared already. That's great. So this very happy lady is Shani. She's our employee, our case study for today. Shani is an account manager. She works in a big, busy open plan office. She has dyslexia and visual stress. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. As someone with dyslexia, her rights are protected under the Equality Act 2010. So what does that mean? Part of what that means is that as an employer, we have a duty to make workplace adjustments to ensure that we remove any barriers that she might face in the workplace. Next slide, please, Mason. Lovely. And I think you might need to click again. Thank you. So obviously, in this case, Shani has come to us and disclosed that she's dyslexic. However, there might be, and I'm sure there will be, many other employees in our company who are dyslexic but don't maybe feel comfortable to come and talk to us. So how can we encourage disclosure? I'm just going to talk about this very briefly. One thing we might think about is the company culture. So do we have a culture that encourages disclosure, that encourages kind of openness? So it might be that, for example, members of the senior management team talk about their experiences with dyslexia or other specific learning differences. And the other thing is to think about for HR specifically, onboarding. So when you're kind of, welcoming someone into a company, making sure that they're aware that, you have a kind of neurodiversity inclusive policy, asking them or just being kind of open about that really. So next click, please, Mason. Thank you. So, but in this case, as I've said, obviously Shani has come to us. She said, look, I'm dyslexic and I also have visual stress. So what happens? What do we do? Well, the first thing is really probably, I'm sure, quite obvious, is that we ask open questions. So questions like, how does it affect you at work? What support do you need? Next slide, please, Mason. Sorry, next click, yeah. So the idea is that we get their perspective. So I want to know what Shani's individual experience of dyslexia is. Because obviously everyone with dyslexia is different. And I think often we can come to this kind of word dyslexia with our own preconceived notions of what an individual can or cannot do. So it's really important that we ask them, how does it affect you at work? Because it will probably be different from the last person you talk to who has dyslexia. So in this case, Shani has a very specific pattern of strengths and challenges. So she comes to you, she says, look, I'm really good at, for example, relating to clients. I'm great at closing a sale. I feel I bring a lot of ideas to the table and, I enjoy presentations. And, those tend to be quite typical dyslexic traits in that they kind of represent very high kind of scores in verbal comprehension and also visual spatial processing. She says, but, despite those things that I'm good at, I'm having some difficulties. One is, we work in an open plan office and I'm finding it pretty much impossible to concentrate. The second thing is when we go into meetings, I'm finding it difficult to remember what's said. Basically, I'm coming out and it's almost like I was never there. All that information has effectively been wiped from my memory. She also talks about she feels quite overwhelmed by large chunks of text. So when she opens an email and there's just a wall of text, it's really quite difficult to process. And she's also getting headaches, and the headaches tend to be a kind of sign of some form of visual stress. And visual stress, quite simply, very simply, is kind of sensitivity to light. So that's something that somebody can experience if they're talking about having headaches or kind of the words moving around. It's not necessarily dyslexia, it's visual stress. Sometimes they can come together, kind of co-concurring, as it were, but sometimes people can just have visual stress or they can just have dyslexia. So the other thing she reports is that she feels it's taking a lot of time to kind of compose emails and reports. So that's her specific pattern of strengths and challenges. So hopefully you've got a good relationship with her, that she's been able to kind of disclose that much detail to you. Next click, please. So what do we do next? So one option we could do is we could signpost her to Access to Work and support her with that process. So for those of you that aren't aware of Access to Work, it's a government grant which funds support and equipment for employees and job applicants with disabilities. And we'll go into much more detail about that in a minute, how we can support her. Next slide, please. Sorry, next click, yeah. So in the meantime, what do we do? So, an application to Access to Work can take some time. Having an assessment can take some time. So we need to make sure that we're putting in what's called interim adjustments immediately. So we can't be seen to be kind of waiting for someone to tell us what to do. And actually, this is kind of, it's not actually just interim adjustments that we need to make. There's such a thing that's called anticipatory adjustments, which is actually, we should be making adjustments even before Shani comes to tell us. So we should be anticipating, which is, I guess, part of a wider kind of inclusive workplace that we need to be catering for. So I'm going to talk now about what adjustments are. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a definition of what workplace adjustments are. This is from ACAS. So a workplace adjustment is a change to remove or reduce the effect of an employee's disability so they can do their job, or a job applicant's disability when applying for a job. So the reasonable adjustment could be to the workplace, so to the physical space. It could be to the way things are done, so processes, methods, or it could be to get someone in to help the employee or job applicant. So that could be a job coach, a strategy coach, or a support worker. So I'm going to give you some examples now of interim adjustments that we talked about, but many of these could also be kind of adjustments that you would put in anyway, in anticipation of having dyslexic employees in your workforce. If you could click, please, Mason, that'd be great. Excuse me. So I've got a couple of examples here. So I guess the first one at the top, where it says written verbal communications, is really thinking about when you're communicating information to Shani, how you're doing it. So if you're communicating primarily verbally, asking her to do things, it might be that you could ask if she'd like that instruction also in written form, because often with dyslexia, and from what she's sort of told you about her memory, it can be difficult sometimes to remember verbal information. So if you kind of supplement or augment that information in written form in an email, then that can just help, basically. At the bottom, I've put bullet points or small paragraphs. So this is about actually when you are emailing her, making sure that you're using bullet points, that you're using small paragraphs, basically that you're not just kind of, having a kind of a massive chunk of text that you're kind of, clicking send to, because the effect on Shani of opening that email and being kind of met by this wall of text is going to cause stress and anxiety. So if we look at the sort of slightly orange post-it notes, top right, templates to help with reports and emails. So when Shani says it's taking her time to compose emails and reports, it might be that together you actually sit down and look at, are there some templates that we can work on, that we can create together for reports and emails, and this would just speed up the process so that Shani's not starting from scratch every time. So if we look at the pink post-it notes, so one thing I've said is noise cancelling headphones, if that's something that's available at this point, if she's working in an open plan office, and also having the option to have a private or a quiet working space. So for example, if she's doing a lot of kind of very sort of high focused tasks like writing, where you have to really think, kind of thing, and she needs a bit of space, then it might be that she has a kind of breakout space or a private meeting room that she can go to do that. And then the last thing I've written is a notice. So, for example, when she has deadlines, just making sure, obviously, you give her enough notice. And if things have to change, a deadline might change or a meeting might change, just being aware and being sensitive to that you just try and give as much notice as possible and support her with that. So that's just kind of an overview, I guess, of what interim adjustments we might put in place immediately. And also, I guess we might call them also soft adjustments, in the sense that they're relatively easy to put in place. They don't cost any money, apart from the headphones, but it's quite a low cost. And also, you don't have to order any equipment in. These are things you can kind of negotiate between yourselves. So next slide, please, Mason. So I'm going to talk now about access to work, if as a company you decide to go down this route. So we're going to talk about what it is, how to apply, what it involves in terms of the assessment, what do you do as the employer once the support is agreed, and crucially, who pays for the support. So next slide, please, Mason. So access to work, the process, what is it? I've kind of touched on this before. It's a government scheme that provides discretionary grants to enable people with disabilities to take up or remain in work. If you could click, please, Mason. Thank you. So how to apply. So what you would do, obviously you would explain to Shani this is what this is, and you would signpost her to this website, which is a government website. It's relatively straightforward. It's you need to obviously give some information, but it's not too detailed. So Shani, for example, would need to say in this application how dyslexia affects her in the workplace. So it need only be like one or two sentences. What help she is currently getting, if any, so what adjustments are already in place, and what kind of help she thinks she needs. So again, it's very much about the individual experience. And they need to include also their workplace address and contact, because access to work will need to be in touch with the line manager or the named kind of work contact on the application form. Next slide, please, Mason. So, and another click, I think, with that one. Thank you. And again, maybe. I think there's another click there. Yeah. So what happens then? So generally, an access to work advisor will call Shani, have a chat just to confirm her details, and that advisor will then refer Shani to an assessor, which is an independent holistic assessor. It's really important they're independent of the Department for Work and Pensions. So an assessor will contact Shani, make an appointment to conduct. So the purpose of the assessment is for the assessor to understand Shani's job role. So not just, I'm an account manager, but it's actually looking at, what are the kind of tasks within that role. So what do you actually do if you break it down into the tasks? And then looking at the barriers that Shani is experiencing in the workplace, the challenges, all very specific to the workplace. It's called a workplace needs assessment. So it's about how her specific learning difference affects her in the workplace. So recommendations. So within the assessment, the assessor might make some recommendations there and then, but they will go away, write a report with a full list of recommendations, and that report will then be sent to Access to Work for funding consideration. So hopefully all goes to kind of plan, and the employee and the employer will then receive an award letter confirming the amount of funding that is available for Shani. If you could click, Mason, please. Thank you. So in this case, recommendations for Shani in the report, we've got a couple of pieces of assistive technology. You've got a text-to-speech software. You've got a screen tint, particularly for her visual stress, so she can reduce the kind of sensory overload on the screen and reduce the brightness. You've got some mind mapping software, which would help with any planning, presentations, or kind of long form writing. And you've got some speech to text software, so for example, like Dragon, so she could speak and it would kind of type up what she's saying, and she could also potentially control the computer by speaking, if that's something that would be helpful. So alongside that assistive technology, she would be provided with assistive technology training. Obviously, there's no point in having all this great technology if you don't know how to use it. So it's really important to have high quality training alongside it. And also they're going to recommend some strategy coaching. In this case, it's 4 times 2 hours. It really just depends on what needs to be worked on. And we can talk about that in a minute, what that would involve. So next slide, please. Oh, not next slide. Thank you. Support. Sorry. So once the support is agreed, what happens? Okay. So once you get that employer letter, sorry, that award letter, it's actually up to the employer to purchase the equipment or the support first of all, and then the employer claims back costs from Access to Work. There are a number of claim forms that Access to Work will send the employer and the employee to help manage that process. Now, where do you go for all this great assistive technology and training and coaching? Well, of course, here at Dyslexia Box, we do supply assistive technology products, training and coaching, but of course, there are many other suppliers as well. New slide, please. So the crucial question, who pays? Okay, so if Shani is in the first 6 weeks of employment, then Access to Work will fund 100% of all costs. So that's any equipment, any strategy coaching, any training. Now, if Shani is 8 weeks in with your company or 8 years, then it gets a little bit more complicated. So in this scenario, any strategy coaching in any case or kind of human support, you might call like a support worker, is 100% funded by Access to Work. So that's regardless of how long the employee has been there. So that's really good. Any equipment, so for example, the assistive technology equipment I mentioned, is dependent, what the employer pays is dependent on the company size. So if you're a small company, if you have between 1 and 49 employees, then you pay nothing. If you're a medium-sized company, so if you're between 50 and 249 employees, then you pay the first £500, and then anything above that, you would pay 20% up to £10,000. If you're a large employer, so you have, for example, 250 plus employees, then as the employer, you need to contribute the first £1,000 of costs, and then over that amount, you would pay 20% up to £10,000. So there's the kind of the maths lesson over for now. Next slide, please. So, and if you could click again, Mason, please. Thank you. So here's Shani again. Obviously, she's looking much happier now. She's got all her adjustments in place. Another click, please. Thank you. So she's got her assistive technology. She's got text to speech, like, for example, Claro. She's got mind mapping software. In this case, I've mentioned MindView, and speech to text. So she's got Dragon. If you could click again, please, Mason. Thank you. And so the strategy coaching. So the idea of strategy coaching is that she works with a strategy coach who develops techniques and strategies to enable Shani to be independent and to I guess, work on things, to be an independent, I'd say learner, but we're not kind of in higher education, but an independent person. So for example, the sorts of things that you might work on are techniques to do with concentration, skim reading, planning, memory techniques, those sorts of things. But again, it's individual, depending on what the individual needs are. If you could click again, please, Mason. So these now are a lot of the kind of adjustments that we talked about earlier, the interim adjustments. There's a couple of other ones that have been added here. So, for example, if you look bottom right, it says visual aids. So, for example, the assessor might suggest to the line manager that when you're having a meeting with Shani or one-to-one or picture, and I'm not talking kind of Leonardo da Vinci picture, or you don't have to be a good drawer. It's not about that. It's just about having a kind of another way of communicating, and often visual. If you can communicate in a visual way, then that will help as well. So we talked about the templates, about notice. The advisor, if you see in the middle top, has has also talked about putting in regular breaks to make sure that Shani isn't getting to the point of kind of sensory overload, particularly because she's got visual stress and she's working in a open plan environment. That she has a designated desk. Often these days, a lot of offices have sort of hot seating, hot desks, but it's quite important that she has a designated desk so she can have, you know, her equipment on the same computer, that everything is set up exactly how she needs it. And it might be also, in some cases, that an assessor recommends flexible working hours to ensure that she's kind of working at the time that kind of suits her. We talked about noise cancelling headphones. They might also talk about white noise and suggest that that would be helpful for Shani. So next slide, please. So thank you very much for listening. I've put some resources here. The two primarily that I've used for this talk. One is from ACAS's website, Reasonable Adjustments. The other is a online PDF booklet from the TUC. It's called Dyslexia in the Workplace, and that's actually really, really useful if you want to have a look at that. I have obviously put the link, but I don't think you'll be able to obviously click on that here, but if you just sort of Google TUC Dyslexia in the Workplace or ACAS Reasonable Adjustments. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening. Obviously, I'd welcome any questions. And yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Deborah. What an amazing talk that was. It was really interesting for us there to listen to how we can use that in employment. Did you enjoy that, Deborah?
I did, yes, I did. I've been practicing it for enough.
It's interesting listening to you speak. I've heard you speak before, and it's brilliant. So.